now we have audio. Don't know exactly what caused that, but we should be okay now. So now we are good to go after a litany of technical issues on both my end and theirs. Went from having a stream tonight to not having a stream tonight to now once again having a stream tonight. So we should be able to continue on, not quite as scheduled, but shouldn't be having any issues from here on out. So we should be okay. So here at the end of practice, since we are not going to have our sim grid names, everything is going to be a little bit different, and I'll try to remember who everyone is. We also do have a couple newer drivers, but I am not so much used to seeing gamer tags rather than names from SimGrid, so we'll try our best to see how we do. Recruit, who I believe is Douglas, is at the very top of the board with Rowan Infernal in second currently. And now for qualifying. It's going to be a 15-minute qualifying, not going to quite be our regular format, and we're not going to be able to see all of our drivers for our Holy Grail series, so I will try to do my best to keep everything kept track of together. Trotman Grant actually leading the field out of the pit lane in that number 246 M4 GT4. Who is that just behind this? Going to be the number 59 of Jennings. Also coming through there, and then going around is the number 59 of Jennings. The 32 of Douglas well in that mix, and does also have at the front of the field, that is the 32 of Douglas, and I believe that could possibly be Wagner there in second. That is going to be Wagner, the number 99. So I remember a few of the names and tags. Shows you about how long I've been with TRC. But Douglas will get us started here in qualifying out of the final corner onto the pit straight and across the line to start the first flying lap of this session. Going all the way to the outside curb, carrying as much speed as possible. The track limits here at Red Bull Ring when it is dry are very, very lenient. It's going to be Douglas versus Wagner here to get the pole sitting lap, or at least the pole setting lap. Is not going to guarantee a position on pole position, but is at least going to be the time to beat for the rest of the field. Coming out of turn 3 there, the uphill hairpin is going to be very tricky, especially with some of the drivers running these cars with little or no traction control, as we saw Jennings go around earlier. And as they come into turn 4, cascading downhill right-hander with a lot of camber that you can use at least until it runs out at corner exit. You come around 5 and into 6. The inside curves here can be a little bit brutal. You will see some drivers use them, some drivers not. Some drivers may want to set up for the wide exit. But here coming through turn 7, you're going to see a lot of those curbs used on all sides of the track, trying to maximize track width usage and carry as much speed as possible, especially into the penultimate corner here. Very easy to go too far to the left and run outside of track limits. coming out of the final corner and holding a margin pretty steady all the way through that entire lap. It's going to be Douglas on top currently with a 36.9. Wagner's previous lap was invalid. And then Jennings and Grant coming in behind P2 and P3 currently. Lindbergh up into P2. The 111 of Miller not setting a lap that time. The 35 of Granados not setting a lap. And the 26 of Loop Guy, who I believe may be a newer driver in this series tonight. Coming around for another lap, Douglas looking to improve on the previous pole-sitting lap, and Wagner looking to set up a competitive lap, or at least to set a competitive lap about a third of the way through this qualifying session. And across the line, Douglas does not improve, and Wagner does go second. Not good enough for pole position, about a quarter of a second behind. But still plenty close enough to have those times be improved upon. Norman does move up into P9, knocking Trotman Grant down a spot. Drain up into P8. And Heiderstadt into P7. Loop Guy into P13, knocking Granados down to P14. So we do have a little bit of a group of cars behind. They seem to be a little bit more spread out now. Bird looking to set a lap and get a little bit further up the order. Granted, this lap will be valid. Gavman, a newcomer. Bird still invalid on those laps. Merkel also invalid. Gavman, a first-time racer with TRC tonight. Granted, it is going to be with these weird conditions that we have tonight. Looking to see what he can do, or what they can do, to bring a lap and bring a performance here tonight for a first-time performance with TRC. Douglas still leading the field with that 36.9, and Wagner in tow behind, unable to improve. There actually seems to be a little bit of a gap building between them. Lindbergh up into P2, 1.6 tenths of a second behind the 36.9 of Douglas. Douglas currently the only driver into the 136s, as Lindbergh does come in to put new tires and fuel on that BMW GT4. Jack Craters up into P4, knocking Drain down a spot. Still waiting on Merkel and Bird to bring a lap together. Bird coming through the penultimate corner, down the hill for the final corner, hoping to stay clean and bring a lap that will be valid and set on the board. It is valid. It is good enough for P5. Atwell currently P10. And Nick, which I believe is Gonzalez, if I am not mistaken, currently in P14 overall. Douglas still the one to beat. And a little bit different than our regular race format that we have, we are going to have a 45-minute race rather than 3 20-minute or 2 30-minute races. So we will possibly see a pit stop for tires, even though 45 minutes is not too terribly long for GT4 tires. It's definitely going to be into the wear zone though. And there's going to be a lot of changes of setup on for fuel. So instead of 2 races tonight, we're going to have 1 45-minute race, as it was a server that was available that we have kind of done a hostile takeover on. But when life gives you lemons, sometimes you make server lemonade, and I believe that is exactly what we have done. Lindbergh trying to improve. We'll have a couple more laps to do so, and Douglas now chasing down traffic is not going to be in the best spot to try to improve. Heiderstadt leading this group with the number 26 of Loop guy behind, 3 of Drain, the 99 of Wagner, and the 32 of Douglas slowly catching up to this group. Coming out of the final corner, Douglas looking to buy some insurance. Lindbergh is close, Wagner is close, Crater's not far off of that time, and Bird currently P5, only half a second behind. There's plenty of time to be found. Douglas does have Wagner up ahead, and if Douglas is able to run slightly faster lap times, we'll be able to pull some slipstream off of the BMW of Wagner. And we may see some contention for pole position here shortly. If not, Douglas will be looking to improve on their lap time. Douglas still the one to beat. Some side-by-side between Drain. And who is that? Drain did make it past, I believe. That was the 26 of Loop guy, which I believe may be Boiling. If I go off of the livery, so if that is Boiling, it is not going to be Boiling's first race with TRC tonight. That goes to Gavman in the number 36, currently running in P19. Who's also being chased down by the 87 of Rowan up into turn number 3. Douglas looking to bring some improvement. We'll have 2 more laps to try to improve, and Wagner has been using slipstream of those cars ahead, throws up a 36.6. That leaves Douglas now a quarter of a second in the negative. So Douglas with a lot of work to do and not getting it done on that lap. A big moment coming off of that yellow sausage curve that lines the outside of turn number 1. Now between Douglas and Wagner. Wagner with Boiling trying to find some sort of grip, some sort of traction heading up the hill out of turn number 3. As they come down into 4, is traffic going to be an issue for Wagner? Douglas, Lindbergh, Craters, and Bird all looking to improve, all within really just a marginal improvement of pole position. Just a corner here or there where you get a better exit out. Wagner has shown the lap times that we can see. It's just up to the rest of the field to match those lap times. Boiling up ahead is actually opening up a gap to Wagner, and Wagner may actually be artificially building that gap to try and find some more room to run before catching the back of Boiling up ahead, but that will also bring Douglas into the fray within slipstream range of Wagner. Did Douglas improve on that previous lap? Did not. It's going to come down to this final lap between Wagner, Douglas. Lindbergh will have one more lap. Boiling will not, and is into the pit lane, is done. Craters will have one more lap. Bird will have one more lap. Boiling into the pits with P4, Drain in at P7, Jennings at P10, Norman at P12, and Granados down to P19. Gavman actually improving. The number 19 of Merkel will get another lap in. Bird now crossing the line. The 45 of Lindbergh now crossing the line, and Craters will cross the line. These current leaders do not have much more time to try to improve, as this will be their final lap. The clock will come down to 0, and Trotman Grant will be the final driver to cross the line, or actually the first driver to cross the line with the session over. We will see if Trotman Grant is able to improve. It's very slow. It is yellow flag, so that's not going to be an improvement. Back to the pit lane for Grant. Wagner coming out of the final corner and across the line. Douglas in tow, but I think it's going to be an invalid lap for Douglas, and that shaking of the steering wheel will all but confirm that. Douglas only good enough for P2, the 800 of, I believe, Gonzalez next across the line up into P14, the 111 of Miller into P15. That's where he will finish. Bird looking to improve. Still have Bird, Rowan, and Gavman on track. Bird coming into the penultimate corner. That BMW cracking and popping off the throttle down into the cascading right-hander before coming into the flattening right-hander. Is it an improvement for Bird? It's good enough for P5, knocking Craters down one peg. Does Rowan have enough to improve into the penultimate corner? And looking for the final corner, it's got to be everything that he's got to try to improve. Does not need much to improve. A quarter of a second goes up quite a few spots. Is it going to be an improvement for Rowan? It's up to P6 for Rowan. And Gavman, I believe, with an invalid lap. So it's going to be Wagner on pole with Douglas P2, Lindbergh P3, Boiling P4, Bird P5, Rowan P6, Craters P7, Drain P8, Merkel P9, Atwell P10, Jennings P11, Heiderstop P12, Norman P13. I believe that is Granados in, that's actually, I believe that's Gonzalez in P14, Miller P15, Salty Breakfast P16, Trotman Grant P17, Gavman P18, and Gonzalez P19. If I am mixing up Gonzalez and Granados, you need to let me know. So let me actually go into the sim grid as of now and check out what I may be missing. So the number $800 is going to be, that is short. My bad, the number 800, actually, is that short? I believe it should be short, the 800. And the number 35, I believe, is Granados, if I am correct. And the number 36 is Gavin Camber. So number 36 is going to be Camber. So Nismo, you are Granados, correct? Yes, Granados, and Gonzalez is so I believe the 800 is short. So I had that completely wrong the whole time. So we should be good now. It is Wagner, Douglas, Lindbergh, Boiling, Bird, Rowan, Craters, Drain, Merkel, Atwell, Jennings, Heiderstadt, Norman, Short, Miller, Breakfast, Trotman, Grant, Camber, and Granados. That is the order, the way that they go down. I almost had everyone memorized, but I think I did not too bad of a job in doing so. And now we are ready to go. We're not going to get the full formation lap. It's just going to be short. But we are engines fired, and let's see how we are going to do this. Are we going to see pit stops? Are we going to see tire changes? How are we going to do it? Only one way to find out, and that is when Wagner leads us off the line immediately into the 2x2 formation. We are not going to get the full formation lap. We're not going to get the full tire warmth that we usually would get. And we're not going to get any of the conditions that we were expecting. We were actually expecting some weather in this race. Not going to get that. We have full optimum conditions. This is going to be as clean and as nice of a racetrack as you could possibly ask for. And everyone getting lined up on the start, trying to warm up those tires and brakes as much as possible. But we are ready to take the green flag as Wagner leads us to the line. And it should be lights out and green, green, green. We are racing here at the Red Bull Ring, and we are going 3 wide into turn number 1. Douglas does get ahead of Wagner, and Wagner is actually almost going to be have contact with Boiling, but Boiling did hold the inside. Douglas very much so in the advantage coming out of turn number 1. Wagner behind will just have to follow. And the rest of the field as they come into turn number 3. Are we going to have any choke point contact? I don't really think so. No one is around just yet. Everything is clean. But we do have, I believe that was Jennings with a massive moment coming out of turn number 3. Back onto our leaders. Everyone fighting for position down into turn number 4. That is one of the more opportunistic points on the track if you were to try and go for an overtake. Very easy to catch the car ahead out on the wide and suboptimal line, but it seems to be that we are going to run into the night here a little bit. Sun has set behind the mountain and it is going to be dusk as Douglas will lead the first lap of this 45 or 42 minute race. Just needs to hold it together for 2 more corners, and it will be Douglas versus Wagner. We'll see if these two are going to be pulling away from the rest of the field. We do have a battle for the podium positions. Battle currently between Bird and Boiling. Bird trying to hold the inside, does have the inside, but well into the marbles. Boiling will go wide outside to the racing line. Bird will just tuck to the inside, but it's the old switcheroo for Boiling, and that's about as textbook and clean as that move could have been done. securing P4 for Boiling, but that does allow Lindbergh to pull away slightly. Douglas with Wagner in tow. And they are still fighting, jockeying for position as Bird trying to hold on to what was at one point looking to be P4, now P5, but they are side by side behind between Rowan and Drain. Drain will have the inside. Rowan will have to try to hang it around the outside as they go single file up ahead. Does seem to be that Drain will throw it to the inside and make it stick. Craters trying to follow through, had a bit of a snap oversteer moment at corner exit. We'll just try to follow through with the rest of the field as everyone gets lined up and tries to resume their pace. Rowan with a bit of a moment going wide at the exit of 6, but does wrangle that car back onto the racing surface, but that will cause him to be under attack from the 913 of Craters very shortly. Could see this overtake begin to materialize by the time we get to the start-finish line as they come out of the final corner. Big sparks thrown by the BMW of Rowan, and that's not going to help Rowan's exit of that final corner as we run up towards turn 1. Craters is going to opt to the inside. I think it's going to be the late braking move. It is not. Someone's got a meatball flag. And is that going to be the 103 of Bird? I don't think so. Is it the 59? I also don't think so. Merkel doesn't really seem to have too much damage either. But someone out there had the meatball thrown at them. We'll just have to wait and see who that might be. I don't see too much damage on anyone's car yet, but it is very quickly falling into nighttime here at the Red Bull Ring. Actually extremely quick. Wagner getting caught out at corner exit of turn 4 there. And dropping back quite a bit to Douglas. Douglas in a perfect position to just hold on to this lead for the time being. Next it is Boiling ahead of Lindbergh with Rowan once again. Actually with Drain behind now. Rowan has actually dropped back a little bit. Going back to Heiderstadt and Bird. Bird, I think, went a little straight on at turn number 1. Pulling the turn 1 Baku move, which we have seen quite a few times. Just locking the brakes up. Heiderstadt going wide. Do not want to do that too many times. You will get track limit violations there. That's not going to be the little haha, you went past the track limit, didn't really gain. That's going to be gaining an advantage outside of the track limits, and that is not going to be how you want to run your race, especially if you only get 3 of those warnings before you get a drive-through penalty. Behind, Miller went very, very wide, and we're actually taking the NASCAR line through number 1. Watkins Glen was last week, guys, but I appreciate the enthusiasm as Granados now ahead of Short and Jennings. Douglas still pulling away from Wagner, who I believe is having some issues coming into turn number 4, running very, very wide, but we've got a heck of a battle here for P3. Boiling ahead of Drain, ahead of Lindbergh with Rowan and Craters just behind. 6 cars all in this one group jockeying for position. Who is that went a little bit wide? Was it Craters? I believe it may have been, but they are 3 all together fighting for position up ahead. On board with Drain, as we see Boiling going very defensive, trying to hold Lindbergh behind. And this will open the door for Drain as they go side by side through turn number 1, and they make contact up ahead. Drain had to check up, but does get a bump, and we have chaos early on. Rowan with nowhere to go as they started to wreck in front. And there goes the battle for the podium positions between Lindbergh, Drain, and Boiling. That was a 3-car incident, all 3 battling for position, as now I think Craters did have to avoid contact there. Rowan finds himself in position to take home a podium, with now Atwell and Craters fighting for position behind. In a four-way battle for position as Boiling will try to regain those lost positions. It's not over yet, but the number 246 of Trotman, Grant, and Jennings having a scrap at turn 4. Very easy to just not get the exit of that corner that you were looking for. And if you're the car behind following close, expecting the car in front to take the exact same line that you are projected at taking, and they make a slight mistake, have to check up, get off the throttle, pedal that car to try and get the grip as best as possible, and you end up driving into the back of them, that is just kind of something that you have to watch out for. May want to open up that gap to those cars ahead if you are heading into the tight corners like turn number 3 and turn number 4. Douglas still holding on to the lead coming out of turn number 1. Wagner is still there. Douglas has no room to breathe, but it has started to grow that gap. Rowan 10 seconds behind the P2 running Wagner. And Atwell has now made it past Craters, and Craters has actually fallen back behind Norman. As Norman up into P5, Craters down to P6, Bird P7. As it does seem to be chaos will reign here at the Red Bull Ring. Lindbergh back up into P8, Heiderstadt P9, Breakfast P10, Drain up to P11, still trying to scrape back those positions, just made it past the 111, the 111 of Miller. And Boiling also trying to follow Drain through there as well. Short running in a league of their own with Granados and Grant battling for position behind. And behind them, Jennings and Merkel battling for position. Who has gone wide here? It seems to be both the 246 of Grant and the 35 of Granados, as Merkel moves up and grabs a couple positions there, and maybe leaving Jennings behind in the dust. Rowan in a little bit of no man's land here, but able to hold on to this position for now, as Atwell and Norman and Craters will all be battling for position behind. And Gavman up into P15 in their first TRC race tonight, coming out of the penultimate corner and leaving that quartet of BMWs behind, of Grant all the way to Jennings. Through turn number 1, making it through clean, will now try to close up to the 800 of Short behind, but just behind this group of 4 is definitely racing very hard. They are all racing for position together. Jennings looking to make a move on Grant, as Grant will have to go very defensive into turn number 2, or turn number 3. Jennings almost getting it around, getting very squirrely, having to get some counter steer in there, but did get that BMW pointed straight. Grant is still in the defensive position coming into turn number 4. But I think Jennings may have it around the outside, does not, too deep on the brakes, and they all 3 go into the sand trap at turn 4. And I think it's actually going to be Granados that will be the benefactor, getting 2 for 1 there. Granted, losing some track position to the cars ahead, but does get 2 positions in 1 corner. Douglas has now dropped back to Wagner slightly, as Wagner is much closer than he was in the previous laps. And Rowan growing the gap to Atwell and Norman behind, but it is becoming a 3-horse fight for P4. They're all trying to catch Rowan, who is able to kind of drive on his own, but they are hard charging behind. Atwell ahead of Norman. Atwell currently leading in the AM Holy Grail split, with, I believe, Heiderstadt being the next driver in line. They're in P9. And as they go into turn 4, Norman, a late braking, I think last minute move, trying to force Atwell wide around the outside at 4. They make a little bit of door-to-door contact coming into 6. Does that help Norman slightly with that wider line? I think Norman may actually have had to back out of it a little bit, and that will bring Craters into this fight. Craters did get 2 tires on that sand, causing him to lose a little bit of speed, but is going to be within slipstream range of these cars up ahead. That is also going to bring Bird into this battle, and the longer they battle up here, Lindbergh will get closer and closer. Douglas with Wagner now quickly gaining. That gap has been halved between the previous lap and this lap. Was 1.3, now 0.6. Are we going to see a move for the lead shortly? Is Douglas starting to make mistakes? Has Wagner just found the chink in the armor that he is able to penetrate and has found what mistake was made? Or is Douglas just feeling the pressure of having Wagner so close for so long? Sometimes you don't need to really press the overtake. You just pressure the driver in front until they make a mistake, and that could be exactly what's going on. But as the great Murray Walker says, catching is one thing, passing is another. Wagner could get very, very close, but here at the Red Bull Ring, very easy to defend. As long as you can hold them off by the time they reach you in the corner, you should be okay. There are long straights here, but one of them being uphill, and these M4s not really having too much of an effect when it comes to slipstream. Could be very hard to overtake should Wagner be able to catch the 32 of Douglas up ahead. Wagner is definitely catching him, and it does seem to be coming through Sector 3, as that gap now to 0.5. So I think Wagner may just be getting a better run out of the final corner. As they run up the hill, Wagner will definitely be within slipstream range, but just not quite close enough. Miller into the pit lane, and I did see that there were some yellow flags thrown between Jennings and Grant. I believe those 3 may have had a little bit of an issue at turn number 3. Scored at the next sector line, at the line beginning with Sector 2. Douglas is losing time to Wagner. We'll have to wait and see how the next sector fares if Douglas is losing even more time, as the gap has dropped a 1/10 between the start-finish line and the Sector 1, Sector 2 timing line. As we come into the Sector 2 and 3 timing line, the gap has grown, so Douglas edging out the gap a little bit through Sector 2. Losing out through Sector 1. We'll see how it goes through Sector 3. This could be where Wagner is making all of his time. They come out of the penultimate corner and into the final corner. Is this where Wagner is gaining the time? More eager, more confident on the throttle, and it definitely seems to be so. As they come across the line, how has that gap fared? A 10th taken away. The gap has grown a 10th from where it was on the previous lap, but Wagner has found some ground to be made. Rowan's still in P3, but Bird has found a way past the 2 of Norman and Lindbergh. Actually, where has as Lindbergh made a mistake into turn number 1. That allowed Norman to just follow right through, but I feel like we have lost someone in that fight. I think it may... I don't think it was a 3 of Drain, but I feel like we did lose a dog in that fight, but I could be wrong. Bird up into P4. And now Rowan may be under attack if Bird has got some pace in that car, but back onto the battle for the lead. Wagner is pushing, and we go back to the talk about tire wear. We are about halfway through this race. 45-minute race is possible on one stint. Are we going to see anyone come in? Do we see anyone have the wrong fuel load? I believe people were planning on 2 30-minute races or the 20-minute races. Obviously, we are about to reach that 20-minute time, but are we going to see anyone not running race fuel? Winter, we did have some server issues, so we're actually running this on a random public server that we found at the Red Bull Ring. That's why everything is so weird. But we are making it work. There are no SimGrid names. I have just memorized who is who. Norman and Lindbergh dodging and weaving into turn number 1, but Lindbergh unable to really find the gap to make that move work. Norman will hold on to it for now, and the gap between Rowan and Bird is shrinking as this duo comes into turn 3. Lindbergh feigning the move on the inside, hopping up onto the banking to try and get a good run out. You can't really do that too many times. You will get those warnings for taking advantage, leaving the track limits. The gap between Douglas and Wagner has now grown a little bit. This push and pull of this battle has continued on. And going back on with Drain and Lindbergh, or not with Drain and Lindbergh, with Norman and Lindbergh. Lindbergh running wide, 2 tires in the sand. Same mistake that we saw Wagner make previously. The number 59 of Jennings into the pit lane with damage from turn number 2. Unsure of exactly what caused that, but could be on the trailer for Jennings as well. Or just some repairs needed. Douglas and Wagner, the slugfest continues as we approach the halfway point of this race. Heiderstadt and Boiling, I think, has finally broken free of this fight. It was Craters that was the one that we lost on that fight up ahead. I don't know if Craters just made a mistake or what, but Craters was fighting up there with Rowan, Bird, Norman, and Lindbergh, but has now dropped back to P9. Atwell also dropped back. It is now Heiderstadt leading the Holy Grail fight. As I believe Atwell has made a mistake as well. The battle at the front continues, but let's hop onto this battle for P5 between Norman and Lindbergh as it just continues on. Lindbergh, I believe, has finally found a way past Norman. Norman trying to fight it back, not really wanting to give it up that easy. Douglas and Wagner definitely broken away from the rest of the field, and Rowan is going to need to go defensive, as I believe Bird is catching. It will take some time for Bird to catch Rowan, but it's definitely a gap that is closing now. Sub 3 seconds the gap between Rowan and Bird, and Rowan is going to have to make that BMW very wide when Bird does eventually catch up. And I believe it is on the trailer for Jennings for now. Battle for position, though, between... Actually, it's not a battle for position. Miller has come out of the pit lane. Did need to go in for repairs and has come back out. So it is not a battle for position there. Wondered why they were so close together with no delta to match. So it seems that we have very fast time change here with this lobby that we have found. A little bit improvised today, a 45-minute race instead of 2:30s or 3:20s. And no mandatory pit stops. Still don't know if we will see one. But if we do not, it is definitely going to be tires dying of death by the time we get to the end, especially with already seeing spins from drivers essentially right at the very beginning of the race. We saw them in practice and qualifying at turn 3. But we have gone back daytime, at least early morning. We don't have any change in weather, but we will have some slight changes in track temperature. For the most part, I think the tire wear and everything should be okay, as we kind of assume a regular race pace. Everyone has started to spread out. There have been mistakes made. Rowan currently in P3, and it would be a great finish for Rowan if he can finish here. But Bird has now gained half a second. And Bird, I think, getting a much better exit of turn 3. Rowan will once again just have to defend quite a lot when Bird does eventually get closer. As we see him closing in, hopefully the pressure doesn't get to Rowan there and he is able to make it a fight for position, but Bird does definitely seem to have a pace advantage and will likely catch Rowan before too long. Heiderstadt with Craters and Atwell behind. This is also going to be the battle for the Holy Grail lead between Heiderstadt and Atwell. Should Atwell be able to catch back up to the 109 of Heiderstadt? Craters looking to find a way past, currently P9. And pre-race was expressing some concerns with this season so far. Just overall not too happy is Craters with his performance so far. Definitely looking for a good result tonight to try and reclaim some of that positions and points that, you know, maybe he hasn't gotten exactly what he wanted or what he was thinking. He was going to be running, calling this a revenge week. And I don't know exactly what happened. Was running up higher on the leaderboard, but dropped back. I believe a mistake was made or caught up in an incident, which there has been no shortage of today. But Craters now looking to find a way past Heiderstadt as they head up into turn 3. Hopefully we get a little bit of that revenge that Craters is looking for. It looks to be a clean move around the outside from Craters. And will slot in position ahead of Heiderstadt, and we'll try to continue pushing forward and find a way onto the back of the 26 of Boiling up ahead. Now, if Heiderstadt is at a pace disadvantage to Atwell, then we may very well have a battle for the Holy Grail lead here shortly between Heiderstadt and Atwell behind. Battle for the lead is definitely heated up. Less than half a second. This gap has closed once again, and we see Douglas running wide through turn 1. The last thing you want to do is get that track limit penalty when you are fighting for the lead. Just trying to... We talk about Craters having a revenge week, trying to revenge drive. Like, you know, you may think that you are losing time, and a very late move for Wagner. Door-to-door contact between the leaders. Douglas has got to go through the grass, and I don't know if maybe just Douglas wasn't expecting that move at all, or if Wagner was very late on the brakes. may have been a mix of the two, but Douglas was not expecting Wagner to be there, bowed out of the move. Wagner with nowhere to go. They did eventually make contact, not taking advantage of that move, giving the position back and living to fight it another day. As we have the number 13 of Norman dropping back in positions. Was it a spin? As big damage on the front of that BMW dropped out of the fight, I believe in the top 5. As it is now just going to be between Lindbergh and Bird. And now 1.7 seconds behind the 87 of Rowan. But back onto this battle for the lead, and it does seem to be that Douglas is fading. Wagner is catching. We'll see. We have seen this gap get around this close before, but it just was not able to be held. And Douglas and Wagner fighting out of turn 1 through the kink of 2 and eventually up into the right-hand hairpin of 3. Funny enough, this fight right here, all three of us, myself, Douglas, and Wagner, all met together at the Lone Star Le Mans at Circuit of the Americas a couple weeks ago. The number 11, or 111 of Miller, off at turn 5. And I think we may see these leaders start to come into traffic here within the next couple laps. Granted, they don't cause any ruckus amongst themselves. Douglas wide into turn 6. Is that going to open the door for Wagner to find some improvement as they come through 7? Douglas still very wide. Is Douglas starting to suffer from that tire wear? Those front tires really seeming to not want to cooperate, and now Douglas going to have to be defensive into the penultimate corner. Opening the door for Wagner. Wagner walks through it. Douglas closes that door once he locks Wagner into the overtaking position. Forces Wagner to take the suboptimal line, having to brake behind, essentially just parking yourself on the apex and forcing the car behind to find a way through. Battle for the lead, 12 minutes left. We are over the 2/3 of the way through. Or I guess right at the 2/3 of the way through. Oh, we're well over the 2/3 of the way. We're actually almost 3/4 of the way through. Does Wagner get a better exit out of 3 there? It did seem to be that he was a little bit smoother, but I don't think he quite got as good of an exit as Douglas did. The gap has now grown again, and that catching versus passing analogy that we see and we hear so often in racing commentary. The Murray Walker catching is one thing, passing is another. It's definitely holding true today as we see Wagner get as close as 4/10, almost 3/10, and then that gap just grows. But we definitely see, as wide as Douglas is coming out of 6 and 7, that there definitely seems to be some tire wear issues on that BMW. Those front tires not really wanting to cooperate, and that may be kind of the cause of Wagner finding that time. We will just have to talk to them after the race and see how they feel with that tire wear, because it definitely seems that Douglas is having some issues getting the front end of this car to cooperate. Let's actually go on board coming into turn number 1. Everything seems okay there. A lot of steering input though. I'd actually much rather see, whenever we get to the complex, the inner complex of turns 5, 6, and 7, or 5, 6, 7, and 8, it's really through 7 that we see Douglas kind of scrubbing wide and missing that apex, kind of running off of the racing line. We are running a lot longer than everyone expected to be, and kind of past the the statute of limitations for pit stops. There's really no point doing it at this point. If you've gone this far, you're not going to have enough time to regain the positions or time lost with going into the pit lane. But this is what I want to see on board with Douglas here, coming around turn 7 and kind of tidying it up a little bit more. Looking behind, Wagner seems to be a little bit better on the tires, is right there. Douglas did get a little bit tighter on the apex, but Wagner is able to follow through, carry more speed as they come out of the final corner. Wagner is all over the rear of Douglas. Is that pressure starting to surmount on Douglas's shoulders? Not quite going defensive, half defensive into turn 1. Wagner once again feigns the move very wide into turn 1. And we'll get a good run out. Are we going to see door-to-door racing up the hill into turn 3? Wagner has a run, but is going to be on the outside. Very hard to make it work around the outside at turn 3. Nowhere to really go, but Douglas is also going to be forcing the tighter line, which allows you to, or does not allow you to carry anywhere near as much speed. Wagner up on the high line on the outside. Douglas will continue holding the inside. Does that higher line give Wagner that extra burst of speed to get out ahead? I think Douglas will just keep a nose in this fight. And if Douglas, no, Wagner later on the brakes. Is Douglas able to respond, though, as Douglas would have theoretically the better exit if Wagner was much later on the brakes, but I don't think Douglas is quite going to be able to respond. A late race overtake for the lead. This battle has gone on the entirety of the race, but Wagner did put that pole position lap up. And just behind, Rowan has now been caught by Bird and Lindbergh. Is the pressure from Lindbergh behind going to be enough to keep Bird off of Rowan and bring Rowan the podium? Douglas now officially scored P2 as Wagner will lead his first lap of this race, but is Douglas going to be close enough to have a fight back for this lead, or is it just going to have to come down to heroics? You don't want to leave it to heroics, as it is essentially gambling at that point. Wagner wide out of turn 1. Did Douglas get the better exit? Douglas is also going to be within that slipstream, albeit not quite as strong as we see, especially in the higher speed cars. And also with some traffic up ahead. Does Douglas get a better exit of turn 3? Yes, he does. But I don't know if he'll be close enough to get a nose on the inside into turn number 4. As the battle for the lead continues to heat up. Rowan trying to hold on to P3 with Bird and Lindbergh both gaining behind. And Douglas side by side out of 4 through 5. Wagner will have the inside. Douglas, is he going to be able to hang it around the outside, or does he try to set up wide and carry more speed through? Is it going to be the old switcheroo for Douglas into turn 7? Very hard to make it work. Not really much of an overtaking opportunity, but Douglas is still there putting that pressure on. And this race is not over yet. Wagner with traffic up ahead. The 111 of Miller, who is a couple laps down but could throw a wrench in this fight, as he is still a car on track that does need to be respected, albeit not in the battle for the lead here. But they cannot drive through him. And how does Wagner position Miller to try and put Douglas at a disadvantage? How does Douglas try to time this overtake to not lose any time should Wagner be able to put Miller between the both of them? And Miller will stick to the outside as they come up the hill. Is Miller going to go late on the brakes, goes wide to the outside, does not disrupt this battle, but Wagner gets a poor exit and Douglas gets a much better exit, but I don't think he was quite in a position to take advantage of it. Wagner with a spin, shaking the tires up into 3. As Douglas looked like he had the better exit, but I think maybe pedaled the car as to not make contact with the driver ahead. And Rowan with Lindbergh and Bird behind. Also the battle for the Holy Grail lead as Atwell and Heiderstadt make contact heading up the hill into turn number 3. I think Atwell may get this lead back in the Holy Grail, but Heiderstadt does hold the inside. Wagner ahead of Douglas, as we've got very many battles going on at once, all coming to a T here at the very end of this race. Rowan with Lindbergh now behind, who has made it past Bird. Has Bird had a pace fall off? Is Lindbergh now going to be the one to challenge for the final spot on the podium? Rowan still just trying to run away. Wagner and Douglas up ahead, battling for the lead still. They have made it past Wagner, but they have more traffic up ahead. Wagner running very wide through turn 1. You start to think, are they gaining an advantage in doing that? Do they have any track limit warnings? Because the last thing you would want, especially after a battle going on this long, is to get a penalty at the very end of the race that just knocks you out of contention for that lead. 3 cars ahead battling for position. Wagner still trying to flash his way through. The number 26 of Boiling around at 7, parked in the middle of the road. I think that car may be stalled out and trying to get it back started. Finally does get it back started and rolling. Wagner with Boiling just behind still. They are cutting through this traffic. Wagner, being the spearhead, is going to take the impact, as they will have to, Wagner will have to be the one making the decisions leading this battle for the lead through the traffic. And if Wagner makes one slip up, Douglas could be in a prime opportunity to overtake for the lead. And I know for a fact that is going through both of their minds right this moment. Lindbergh has now made it past Rowan. Rowan trying to hold on to this podium position as they come through turns 7 and 8. But I don't think Rowan may have the pace to hold on to it. Douglas still trying to find a way past Wagner. And the battle between the AM leaders, as Heiderstadt once again holds on to the lead in Holy Grail. Atwell is just behind, still within a shout of the lead. The leaders with traffic up ahead come into turn number 3. Does Douglas get the better run? Nowhere to really go with the car on the outside. Wagner forced to go to the inside. Douglas forced to follow. And now this is going to be kind of the chess move. Douglas does make it past the 36 of Camber. But Wagner now forced to go defensive on the inside. Douglas will try to get the better exit. So I think it's going to come down to one final lap. This next lap should be the final lap of the race. Just have to see what time they cross the start-finish line with. If it's anything faster or anything less than 1 minute 37 seconds left, which I don't think it's going to be, or I think it's going to be less. I think this next lap will be the final lap of the race. Lindbergh now into P3, and Rowan trying to defend from losing a position to Bird behind. And Heiderstadt and Atwell still fighting for position, fighting for the AM lead. Douglas will have one more opportunity to try and find a way past Wagner, as it's just a few more corners in a minute and a half between Wagner and another victory here. This win is going to be double points tonight. It is going to count for both the race 1 and race 2 positions. Douglas with a lot of work on his plate. It's not impossible, but is going to have to find a lot of time, and now we start to think about those heroics. If I'm going to send a move, it may not have to be heroic. Douglas does get the better exit out of 3 than Wagner. Douglas still just nowhere to really go with that extra momentum. Do we get the heroic move into turn 4? Douglas trying to force Wagner to go a little bit defensive. Doesn't fall for it, at least not as much as I would expect. He did go slightly defensive on the inside. Between Lindbergh, Rowan, and Bird, they are still holding on to their current positions, and coming out of turn 1, the battle for the Holy Grail lead. We'll have to ride on with the battle for the overall, the pro lead, as it is between Wagner and Douglas coming out of 7 and 8. I think Wagner may have it. Douglas, is he thinking about that heroic move into the final corner or into the penultimate corner? It would have to just be absolutely sent on the brakes very, very late. Does he just run it out as wide as possible? I don't quite think so. It could be a drag race to the line if Douglas has the better exit, but I don't think he does. Wagner takes the win in round 5 of the TRC BM246W series. Douglas takes P2, and Lindbergh looks to take home P3. But the battle for the Holy Grail win between Heiderstadt and Atwell in a very similar position to the battle for the overall win that we just saw, coming out of 7 and 8. The gap is about the same. Do we get those heroics here for the Holy Grail battle? Heiderstadt to defend against Atwell. Does Atwell go for the late breaking move? Heiderstadt defensive. Is that going to give him a poorer run out of the penultimate corner as they come into the final corner? Is it the drag race out that we wanted to see with the overall lead? It is not. Heiderstadt takes home the win as Atwell comes P2 in the Holy Grail. I sure hope I have everybody's name right and I know who is battling who. But for an improvised race, that is about as good as it could have gone. Wagner P1, Douglas P2, Lindbergh P3, Rowan P4. Did hold on to P4, was not able to hold on to the podium. Bird P5, Craters P6, Heiderstadt P7, Atwell P8, Breakfast P9, Drain P10, Boiling P11, Merkel P12, Short P13, Trotman Grant P14, Camber P15, Granados P16, Norman P17, and Miller P18. And then I believe in the Holy Grail it was Heiderstadt taking the win with Atwell P2, Short P3, Trotman Grant P4, Camber P5, Granados P6. But I believe that is going to be it for tonight. We ended up making it work, and it ended up being a great race. Once again, thank you all for tuning in. Thank you for those of you who follow and subscribe on Twitch. And if you would like to support me, if you wouldn't mind hitting that follow button on Twitch, subscribing on the YouTube channel, and if you have a Amazon Prime, Twitch Prime subscription, if you wouldn't mind throwing it my way, or if you would just like to subscribe, I am trying to get a new headset, and that would help me a lot in terms of making that happen. Please stick around. We do raid someone at the end of every stream, so if you'll just stick around, we will get that raid going. And let's see who we're going to raid. As I believe we'll go on board with Mel's, who has been live for quite some time, just to one viewer. We're going to go ahead and throw them a raid. So thank you all for tuning in. Let's go ahead and drop by on Mel's. And if you guys wouldn't mind, it doesn't cost you anything. If you'll just throw them a follow whenever we get in there, you know, it would do a lot for them if they just get 8 or 9 followers at once if you're not following them. But yeah, go ahead and raid Mel's, and I will see you guys next week for round 6, the final round of the M4s. Have a good night.